Okay, testing, 1, 2, 3. Let me just get this. Okay, so today is Monday, September 3rd, 2018. Okay, and we'll start with the homage to the Buddha. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Okay, good morning, everybody. Okay, so today we come to we've been going through the Four Noble Truths, and so far we have done the exposition of the first Noble Truth with the explanation, the detailed explanation according to the Visuddhimagga, the path of purification. And now we come to the second Noble Truth. Okay, first the simple sutta statement, and then we'll come to the explanation in the path of purification. Okay, so the sutta statement of the second Noble Truth says, what is the Noble Truth of the origin of suffering? So it is craving, this is Pali tanha, which brings renewal of being. We'll come to that in a few moments. Is accompanied by delight and lust, and delights in this and that. That is craving for sensual pleasures, craving for being, or craving for existence, and craving for non-being, craving for non-existence. This is called the Noble Truth of the origin of suffering. So that is the sutta statement that's to be explained by the Visuddhimagga. So let us see the explanation. Okay, this is sort of, it's an explanation of the Pali terms. Okay, so in the description of the origin, the expression yayang tanha, it's that craving. Okay, this is just a resolution of the words. Okay, but first let's take the word craving, translated as craving. Okay, the Pali word is tanha, and the Sanskrit form is Trishna, and there's an alternative Pali form more closely related to the Sanskrit, tasina. And this word is somewhat distantly related to the English word thirst. And so you could see maybe the connection that what is meant by craving is a kind of blind thirst. And it's the thirst, as the text says, for sensual pleasures, existence, and even non-existence. Okay, then in the elaboration, it says that it's this tanha which is pono bhavika, which derives from the word puna, or puna bhava, which in turn comes from the word puna, which means again, plus bhava, which means existence or becoming, whichever one prefers. Okay, so the word pono bhavika from punabhava means that which is productive of new existence. And this highlights an essential aspect of craving as the second noble truth. In fact, I usually think that there are two ways in which one could see that craving is the origin of suffering or dukkha. I describe these two ways, one as the psychological aspect or the psychological perspective, and then the other I call the meta psychological perspective. Not meta, loving kindness, but like in metaphysics, but we call it meta psychological, beyond the psychological. Okay, so the psychological is something that one could immediately confirm for oneself, that when there's a strong desire and craving for something, okay, that craving creates a sense of inner discontent, dissatisfaction, and then that craving drives one to fulfill that satisfaction. One has to make the determined effort to obtain the object of desire. Okay, so the young man falls in love with the young woman, the young girl. Oh, he can't sleep at night. He's thinking day and night of her, writing her name in his notebook when he should be taking notes in class. Whenever he meets her on the street, he's like so nervous he can't even talk, tongue-tied. So full of craving and yearning for her until he gets up the courage and he meets her on the street and asks, "Would you like to come out for an ice cream cone with me?" Not funny. Because she's going to say, "I'm very busy today." Okay, so now disappointment comes, and yet he's determined, so he tries again and again, till finally he succeeds in getting her to go out on a date, and then little by little, they fall in love, and so now he's so happy that his craving is being fulfilled. So he could see he's delighting in this and that. And then finally, they get married, and now she goes to work, and sometimes he comes to pick her up when she gets out from work. And one day he comes, he's waiting in the car, and he sees she comes out, and she's talking to another man. And so, this isn't funny, this is really... And then when she's not at home, he goes and he checks her Facebook account to see whether there's any Facebook conversations or sneaking up on her iPhone or her cell phone, see what kind of phone calls she's making. And of course there might have been like a few business calls with the same guy, and now the jealousy and suspicion are inflamed. So they're living together, but out of that love, there's real pain and suffering. Then finally it leads to quarrels and fights until the marriage breaks up, then pain and disappointment. So these are just some sort of concrete illustrations of how suffering, a craving, can become the cause of suffering at the psychological level. But you can multiply, thousands and thousands of examples from everyday life. Okay, another example. Always I come back to the iPhone. So I have the craving for the iPhone, the latest model iPhone. So I work hard to earn money to buy it. Finally, I have enough. I buy the iPhone. I'm very happy with it, joyful, delighted that I have that phone that I wanted. I do all sorts of tricks with it, download all of the apps and use the apps on it. And then Apple comes out. I've just been using it, for 9 months, 10 months, and Apple comes out with a newer model. And all of my friends are getting the newer model of iPhone, but I just spent all of my hard-earned money to buy this model, and now I look at it and it seems worthless, useless. And so this is a kind of disappointment comes and dissatisfaction. And so I have to keep up with my friends and then save enough to get the new iPhone and just junk the old one. And this is, we laugh at this, but this is, in a way, it's a tragic comment on our consumerist culture, that things lose their value so quickly, and when they lose their value, we just turn them in and throw them away. And as a result, we're destroying the natural environment on which human life depends. Okay, so this is what I called the psychological aspect of the way craving is a cause of suffering. Okay, maybe it's just some more examples. Okay, so the basic examples of human life. I have the craving for good health, and yet the body falls ill, and so on top of the pain of the illness, there arises the misery, the dejection of having a body that's sick, physically ill. Then this body grows old, and I look around and I see everything is happening with the young people. The young people are the avant-garde, the vanguards of the culture, and I'm an old fogey who barely knows how to use a cell phone, and I see all of the young people on the subway train going like this all the time. And the whole culture prizes youth. And for old people like us, we're sort of discarded, abandoned, useless, ridiculed. So there comes the suffering of old age. And then when I'm old, what do I have to look forward to? Okay, we sort of have, like we do the rocket countdown, 10, 9, 8, 7, 6. So I figure maybe I have 10 years left. Then the new year comes and everybody is celebrating. And where I had 10 sort of on my wall chart, I now cross out 10. Now there's 9, 8, 7, 6. Next year, cross out another number. So now there's 8 left. Yeah, so we're facing death. And so that becomes a cause of suffering, facing our mortality. So there's sickness, old age, and death. Okay, so then we come to what I call the metapsychological, the aspect of the way craving is a cause of dukkha that goes beyond just the psychological relationship between desire and disappointment, frustration, grief, and so on. And this is highlighted by this expression that craving is ponobhavika, that it's productive of new existence, or productive of existence. Yeah, so ponobhavika is productive. Here he says produces further becoming, or I would translate productive of renewed existence, productive of repeated existence. And so this is an aspect of the relationship between the first noble truth, of the relationship between the second noble truth and the first noble truth that's not immediately visible to us. So often when we, especially nowadays, it's traditional in popular Buddhism to explain the Four Noble Truths just relying on the psychological aspect in order to make the teaching somewhat immediately accessible, immediately open to examination and investigation by people who are coming especially from non-Buddhist culture to learn about Buddhism. But if we look at the terminology that the Buddha used in explaining the second noble truth, the first way he describes tanha or craving is that it's pono bhavika, that it's productive of repeated existence, renewed existence. And this highlights the aspect or the role of craving in generating a new existence. That what keeps the cycle of repeated existence in motion, what keeps the cycle turning from birth to death and from death to new birth, is precisely craving. And so when death takes place, as long as there is craving in the stream of consciousness, then that craving will drive the stream of consciousness on to latch on to a new physical organism, that is the ovum, the newly fertilized fetus or embryo. And when craving then latches on to the embryo, then it starts the process of the new existence. And so in that way, craving is what brings into being a new set of 5 aggregates at the start of the new existence. That is what is meant by patisandhi, the relinking. So craving is what causes that relinking. Okay, so craving, it's further described as Nandi Raga Sahagata. And Venerable Nyanamoli, I don't know why but he translated this accompanied by concern and greed, using concern for Nandi. But Nandi is really delight. So I put a note here, or I actually changed the translation, accompanied by delight, and raga is closer to lust or attachment. So these are actually Nandi and raga are things not different from craving, but they're 2 aspects of craving. So the way I see it, that when we don't have the objects that we desire, that is craving in the aspect of raga, lusting after the things that we want, yearning for the things that we want. And then when we get the things that we want, grasping them and holding on to them tightly. So that is the work of raga. And then nandi is delighting in the things that we obtain. Our young man in the story I told a few minutes ago, when the girl says, okay, I'll go with you to the movies, well, then he's delighted. And then when they're together in the movies and going out on dates, he's so happy, he's delighting. And then they send each other birthday cards. Oh, when he gets a birthday card from her, he's so happy. His mind is jumping and dancing with joy. So that is delight. And then Nyanamoli had for Tatra Tatra Abhinandani, he had concern with this and that. Not a good translation. So the better translation would be delighting in this and that. Okay, so this is the way craving works. When the mind is governed by craving, then one seeks delight in whatever one acquires, whatever appears pleasant and agreeable, one seeks delight in that. In fact, I think for Abhinandani, probably better than delighting in would be seeking delight in this and that. So one is always looking for new sources of pleasure, always seeking new objects of enjoyment. And whatever one has over time, it loses its sweet taste and it becomes just ordinary and routine. And so then one has to seek delight someplace else. Maybe the paradigm case of this would be somebody like Casanova, who can never really be satisfied for a long time with any one woman, but after some time, he gets tired of her and then has to go traveling over Europe and seeking new women to woo and to seduce. So always seeking delight in this and that. But then there's a sort of deeper dimension to this, and that is craving is always seeking delight in one form of existence after another. So we're not fully satisfied with what we obtain in this present existence, and so we're yearning for some future existence in which we can continue to enjoy our delights, to find delight and enjoyment. Okay, then comes the enumeration or specification of the kinds of craving. Okay, so Venerable Nyanamoli has craving for sense desires. Again, this seems not good to me, because one doesn't crave for sense desires. Desire is craving. One rather has the craving for sense pleasures. So the way I've translated here, I have craving for sensual pleasures, craving for being, but actually I would prefer existence now. It's more concrete. And craving for non-existence. Okay, so he says that this will be explained in the chapter on dependent origination at 17:233, so let us go down there. Keep this place. .233 was it? Excuse me? No, this is 17. Okay, now I see the idea. Okay. So this is the way I'll sort of sum up the point. So it says when the craving in regard to visible forms, when it occurs enjoying a visible object that is common to the focus of the eye, it is called craving for sensual pleasures. But when it occurs along with the eternity view, that's the view of eternal existence, that assumes that same object to be lasting and eternal, it is called craving for becoming, craving for existence. For it is greed accompanied by the eternity view, or it is greed accompanying the eternity view that is called craving for existence. When it occurs along with the annihilation view that assumes that same object to break up and destroyed, it is called craving for non-existence. For it is greed accompanying the annihilation view that is called craving for non-existence. Okay, so this is just in regard to visible forms, and the same is explained in regard to any of the other sense objects. But I have to say, I don't find this explanation of the three types of craving so satisfactory. Okay, this is my own understanding, sort of off the books, so to speak. Okay, craving for sense pleasures is obvious, so it's the craving for any kind of pleasures through the eye, ear, nose, tongue, body, and through the mind as well, through imagining, constructing mental images, indulging fantasies of sense pleasures, and so on. So this is obvious, so craving to enjoy pleasures of sense objects through any of the six senses. Okay, when we're enjoying sense pleasures, it seems to me we don't go on thinking this object is eternal and everlasting. So I don't see how that could be a satisfactory explanation of craving for existence. And we don't hold the view, if we hold the view that the object is going to break up and be destroyed, then we have right view, a understanding of impermanence, so I don't see how that can be the craving for annihilation. But this is the way I would understand it, and I have actually a basis for this in the suttas. Let me get the sutta that illustrates my point. Yeah, this is from a little work called the Itivuttaka. So here the Buddha says, held by two kinds of views, some devas and human beings hold back, and some overreach. Only those with vision see. Okay, so how do some hold back? Okay, so devas and humans enjoy existence, delight in existence, are satisfied with existence. Okay, so I would say that this enjoyment of existence and that craving to go on existing, that is the craving for existence. The craving that I want to go on forever, retaining my identity. And so with that in view, then I imagine that I rarely think about my death in this life. Somehow I have this underlying assumption, unexpressed or tacit assumption that I'm going to go on forever. And then when the reality of death strikes home, I go on craving for some kind of future existence. You know, I want to be reborn in the heavenly world, I want to be reborn in this realm, that realm, or I construct ideas of it. Maybe this life is transient and subject to mortality, but there will be a future life in which I will live forever in bliss. Of course, there's always the possibility, if I construct the idea of eternal existence, that I'll spend eternity in misery. but we always think, I will get to go to the heaven and remain there forever. So I'd say that that is a kind of craving for existence, craving for eternal existence. And so then the Buddha says, when the Dhamma is taught for the cessation of existence, for the end of becoming, then their minds do not enter into it or acquire confidence in it or settle on it and become resolved on it. So that's the way some hold back. So these are the ones who are dominated by the craving for existence. And so they fashion the view of existence, the view of eternal existence. And when the Dhamma is taught for liberation from existence, then they turn away from it. Okay, the second group are those who overreach, who go too far. And so these are those who are troubled, ashamed, or humiliated and disgusted by existence, and they rejoice in the idea of non-existence. So this I take to be those who are governed by, who are overwhelmed by the craving for non-existence. And so they don't like existence, and so they reject the idea of any kind of future existence, and they say, they hold to this position that when the self is annihilated and destroyed, that the self is annihilated and destroyed at death, and it does not exist after death. So they come to the view that death means the complete end of everything, that there's no personal survival in any form of death. And so they say, that is peaceful, that is excellent, that is the truth. You know, we have some of these, nowadays they call them the new atheists, sort of the fierce and argumentative, polemical atheists, like Richard Dawkins, Sam Harris, the late Christopher Hitchens, you know, who say that we have to be realistic. We come into life just purely through biological causes, and when the biological force of life is extinguished at death, there's nothing beyond. And if you fashion any kind of idea of survival of death in any form, that's just wishful thinking. You're just a victim of fantasy and the propaganda of religions. But we are realistic people with scientific training. Humanity has to face the hard fact that we are just specks of dust in a cosmos indifferent to our hopes. And when death takes place, dust returns to dust. So that seems to be those kind of people. I doubt very much that Richard Dawkins and Sam Harris, that they're troubled, ashamed, and disgusted by existence, but we could see some kind of these, the typical 19th century grim German philosophy professor. Or maybe early 20th century German philosophy professor who says this existence is completely meaningless. No point in existence. It's all just a charade. And when we die, that will be the bliss. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to be making fun of German philosophy professors. Okay, so that's my understanding of craving for existence, is the craving to go on, to retain our identity forever in some form, whether it's through eternity and as an individual person in a heavenly realm, or more subtly in the Indian philosophical milieu, the idea that there is within each person the Atman, the eternal self, which remains forever, Sat Chit Ananda, existence, awareness, bliss. And then the craving for non-existence as the craving for death to mean the complete stoppage of everything, for death to mean the complete end of the entire process of existence. Okay, so this is the noble truth of the origin of suffering. Then we come to the noble truth of the cessation of suffering. Okay, so in the sutta, this is stated as the remainderless fading away and ceasing of that same craving. It's giving that craving up, relinquishing it, letting it go, and rejecting of that same craving. So this is the noble truth of the cessation of suffering. Okay, then we turn to the Visuddhimagga. I had a little file on this. Okay, so the Visuddhimagga says, in the description of the cessation of dukkha, it is the cessation of the origin that is stated by the words, that which is the cessation of that same craving and so on. Why is that? And this is the important point, because the cessation of dukkha, of suffering, comes about with the cessation of the origin. For it is said, for it is with the cessation of the origin that suffering ceases, not otherwise. And then the Visuddhimagga uses an interesting analogy or simile. It says that the Tathagatas, the Buddhas, behave like lions. Okay, so when they make suffering cease, and when they teach the cessation of suffering, they deal with the cause, not the fruit. But the sectarians, that is the ones, the teachers outside of the Buddhist Dharma, they behave like dogs. So when they make suffering cease, and when they teach the cessation of suffering by their various practices, they deal with the fruit or the effect, not the cause. Oh, I thought that there was an elaboration. I think the elaboration is in the sub-commentary. Yeah, so it says that just as a lion, okay, if somebody shoots an arrow at the lion, then the lion will dash at the man who shot the arrow. So the lion goes for the cause, which is the man shooting the arrow. So the Buddhas deal with the cause, not with the fruit. But when somebody throws a stone at a dog, then the dog snarls and it bites the stone, and it doesn't attack the man who threw the stone. And so the sectarians want to make suffering cease. They devote themselves to mutilating the body and to all of these extreme ascetic practices, not by dealing with the internal cause, which is the craving. Then comes an important expression. Okay, we have the expression used in the sutta. It's the remainderless fading away and cessation of craving. And so then the Visuddhimagga commenting says, it's cessation through fading away that is remainderless because of the eradication of the inherent tendencies. Okay, the inherent tendencies, those are the deep tendencies buried deep within the mind, the tendencies towards craving for pleasant feeling, the tendency towards aversion, towards painful feeling, and the tendency towards ignorance about neutral feeling or about all feelings. Okay, so the Buddha's approach is to uproot craving right down to the very level of the underlying tendencies, not just to restrain the outer manifestations of craving. Like there are many spiritual disciplines which teach how to overcome tentatively, to overcome desire and craving and greed, by various disciplines of self-restraint, of prayer and meditation. So those will help to calm down the mind, and by using the suitable reflections, one could keep those tendencies towards craving and greed, one could keep them in check, even overcome them temporarily so that the mind seems pure and bright and luminous. But the tendencies still remain there, because what keeps the tendencies in place is avijja, or ignorance. And so the Buddha's approach is to go for the underlying tendencies, and one has to proceed step by step in removing craving. So through moral discipline, one keeps the coarser expressions of craving in check. Through samadhi meditation, one removes the thoughts of craving that arise. But then it's through wisdom that one uproots the underlying tendencies, the anusaya, the latent tendencies. Okay, then the Visuddhimagga says that as to meaning, all of these are synonyms for nibbana, because in the ultimate sense, it is nibbana that is called the noble truth of the cessation of suffering. And so when we see the cessation of suffering, okay, this we don't need anymore. When we see the cessation of suffering defined as the remainderless fading away and ceasing of that same craving, giving up, relinquishing, letting go, and rejecting of that same craving, one could say that these are terms that are used, I would say, metaphorically for nibbana. So this doesn't mean that nibbana is merely the fading away and ceasing of craving, that it's just the stopping of craving, but rather one would say that nibbana is that state in which craving has completely stopped and faded away. And it's by realizing nibbana that one puts an end to craving. So nibbana is not just a psychological event, the event by which craving fades away and ceases, but nibbana is an unconditioned, unchanging state, a state that is always present, always existent. And it is by experiencing and realizing that state that one eradicates the craving. Okay, then the Visuddhimagga goes into a long passage, which I won't take in any kind of detail, trying to refute arguments held by some of the disputants, the debaters, that nibbana is just non-existence. But the important point comes, let me see. towards the end of this passage, where referring to the sutta, the Visuddhimagga says that this single goal, Nibbana, has two aspects. The two aspects are called the element of Nibbana with result of past clinging left, with the remainder of past clinging, and the other is the element of Nibbana without a result of past clinging. Okay, so what is the result of past clinging? The result of past clinging are the 5 aggregates that we presently have. So we have picked up these 5 aggregates through our clinging from the past existence. At the death of our past existence, we still had that craving for existence, and so we picked up a new set of 5 aggregates that we clung to, and that is this set of 5 aggregates. So these 5 aggregates, this is the result of past clinging. And so an arhat has reached the destruction of craving, the destruction of greed, hatred, and delusion. And so the arhat has the experiential realization of Nibbana here and now, but still for the arhat, the 5 aggregates still continue. The aggregates don't come to an end with the attainment of Nibbana in this life. So the arhat still has these 5 aggregates. They have to eat their meals every day. The body gets tired at night and they have to sleep. They'll get affected by illness. They'll fall ill. That's unavoidable. They'll suffer various pains, injuries. Even some in the Buddha's time were assassinated. There are even accounts of arhats who were assassinated or nearly assassinated. And so one experiences various kinds of dukkha, bodily suffering, dependent on this residue of the 5 aggregates that remains. But the arhat has permanently achieved the destruction of greed, hatred, and delusion. And through that destruction, they have the experiential access, or they have the permanent access to the experience of the Nibbana element. So they can sit in meditation and direct their mind, let me enter into the experience of Nibbana here and now, and they will enter into that experience. And so as long as the 5 aggregates last, they're subject to the infirmities of the body, various pain and suffering of the body. But forever, greed, hate, delusion, or craving and ignorance have been eradicated right at the level of the root. Okay, then the second aspect of Nibbana is called, okay, so it's said here that the stilling of defilement and the remaining result of past clinging in one who has reached it by means of development, that is the Nibbana element with residue remaining. Okay, the second aspect is called the Nibbana without result of past clinging left. Since after the last consciousness of the arhat, who is abandoned, who's no longer arousing or producing future aggregates, there is no further arising of the aggregates of existence in the future. And then those that have already arisen, these 5 aggregates, come to an end. And so that is called the Nibbana element without result of past clinging. And so the present set of 5 aggregates at death comes to an end, and there's no more craving capable of producing a new set of 5 aggregates. So at this, we could say that the process of the 5 aggregates comes to an end, and then what remains for the arhat is the unconditioned element, which is the Nibbana without any result any residue remaining. And then there's an argument that comes from some of the disputants that they say that, well, if that's the case, when the 5 aggregates come to an end and no further production of 5 aggregates, then what remains is just non-existence. The 5 aggregates come to an end, and there's just complete non-existence beyond that. So then the Visuddhimagga argues briefly against this and says that Nibbana is not non-existent, and it refers to a passage in the Iti-Vuttaka and the Udana where the Buddha says that there is an unborn, unbecome, unmade, unformed, and that is referring to Nibbana. Okay, then if you want to read Buddhist scholasticism at its most sophisticated, then you can read this long note to this passage. Well, yeah, this passage refers to a number of statements that come in the Abhidhamma, where the Buddha, where the text describes Nibbana as a Dhamma without condition, an unconditioned Dhamma. There's also the suttas, which speak about a sphere or realm where there's neither earth, water, fire, or air, which calls Nibbana a state very hard to see, and so on. Okay, maybe this should do for now. And at this point, since we have like about 7 minutes in this session, I'll ask whether there's any questions about the second and third Noble Truths. Is that Dina? Is that you? Okay. Dina and...
I'm terrified to ask.
No, never be terrified.
What's the goal?
What is the goal?
What's the goal? Is it to end it all and there'll be no longer existence, no craving?
Yeah.
We reach Nibbana. Game over. Is that the goal?
You could put it that way. But it's from a practical standpoint, you could say that the goal is to end, from a very practical standpoint, to end suffering. And then to end greed, hatred, and delusion. Yeah.
So, end it all. I mean, then it's over. I mean, we crave life.
Yeah.
And if we don't crave life, then I just can't.
End of birth, old age, sickness, and death.
Yeah. I don't get it. I'm sorry.
Okay.
You'll try to help me as we go along.
Okay, I'll think of some other ways. Okay, I see in the back row. Yeah.
I have a question about the difference between Buddha and an Arahant.
Yeah.
Was the Buddha at one point an Arahant? Will Arahants become Buddhas?
Okay. Okay, an Arahant is one who has extinguished all defilements. And so the Buddha is also an Arahant. So the word Arahant, okay, it means, we say it's one who has extinguished all defilements and one who has achieved liberation from the cycle of birth, aging, and death. So that is sort of the minimal definition of an Arhat. And so all those who achieve the destruction of defilements, the liberation from birth and death, are Arhats. And so the Buddha necessarily is an Arhat. But the Buddha is one who has discovered on his own, without relying on the help of any teacher, without any guide, he's discovered the ultimate truth, the liberating truth, and the path to liberation, and then teaches it to the world and makes it known to the world. And so the Buddha is the one who, we could say, establishes the Dhamma in the world. And in order to perform that function, the Buddha has a great number of other powers of knowledge and psychic powers that are not possessed by other arhats, or at least not to the same extent. And so this is what the special characteristics of the Buddha. That's the possession of these special powers of knowledge by which the Buddha is able to teach most effectively in order to guide and to awaken and to liberate others. So the Buddha is the one who, we could say, he's an arhat, but he's the one who discovers the Dhamma for himself at a time when it's not known in the world, and then teaches countless others, and then those who follow the Buddha's instructions and walk on the path taught by the Buddha reach the destruction of defilements, become liberated, and then they become arhat, disciples of the Buddha. So that's the distinction. Okay, Punika.
It's not a question, but this is not a question.
Yeah.
I just want to take this time because some people may have to. For myself,
Yeah.
and all the attendees, that it's an honor to be in your presence, and we want to say thank you very much for teaching us.
Yeah.
And for giving us the gift of Dhamma. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you so much.
Bhante, Nirodha is translated as cessation, but I also heard it as the state of mind before it came into contact with an object. In other words, like, I don't know if it would be the bhavanga or like when consciousness arises, the mind becomes active or whatever. But
for Nirodha?
Nirodha.
I never heard that before.
Okay. And also, the 5 spiritual faculties become 5 spiritual powers.
Yeah.
Is that before or after Srimant, or?
It gets a little complicated. I think there's a difference of perspectives. But I would say from an Abhidhamma perspective, those 5 spiritual faculties will also be powers even before stream entry, just when they acquire a certain degree of power so that it's difficult for them to be overcome by their opposites, for faith to be overcome by doubt, for energy to be overcome by laziness, for mindfulness to become overcome by distractedness or by loss of mindfulness, for concentration to be overcome by distraction, and for wisdom to become overcome by confusion. So when those 5 faculties gain that power so that they can't be overcome by those opposites, then they're powers. Okay, one more question. Okay, you have it, so you take the last question.
On the topic of like the annihilation view, the German philosopher, so on and so forth that you were discussing earlier. Why would you say that is the incorrect view? Like I understand
why do I say that is the?
Why is it the incorrect view? I understand the analogy to like the lion going after the archer that fires an arrow at him, but I guess don't see, because I mean, from a very practical point, it looks like the body's all that exists. So when the body dies, we die, and that's that.
But that is not the Buddhist view. The Buddhist view is that as long as there is ignorance, craving, or greed, hatred, and delusion, the process of becoming will continue. So those are the causes of becoming. And so when the body dies, in the stream of consciousness, there's still ignorance, craving, and so that craving will drive or propel the stream of consciousness onto a new existence. That is called dependent origination.
There was a second part, but I forgot.
Excuse me?
It's okay.
Okay, we'll take the break now until 10:20. Then we come back. Then I will deal with the Noble Eightfold Path, and then we look at the sutta texts on the Four Noble Truths. And in the sutta text, then we're going to find the 3 turnings and the 12 aspects of the Four Noble Truths, that's very important. Okay, so let us take the break.